You probably know of me in connection with my work on free software. That's free as in freedom. It doesn't mean zero price. And in fact, we've taken the opportunity to bring some things here to give out and some to sell to support the Free Software Foundation. But this is not a talk about free software. This is about an issue that threatens all software developers. The danger that you could get sued for writing a program yourself. You may have heard other people refer to this topic by a confusing propaganda term called, quote, intellectual property, unquote. I'm going to ask you please to forget that you heard that term, because it's both biased and confusing, and it's an obstacle to understanding the issues that I'm going to be talking about today. You can clearly see the bias, because it's a term that describes various different legal issues and various different laws, and it prejudges the most important, the most basic question, the first question, in each area you might try to apply it to, which is, how should we treat this sort of thing? Well, if you're calling the question intellectual property, then you're assuming you're going to treat it as some kind of property. So you've prejudged the first question. If you want to be able to consider all the options, then you shouldn't use that term. So when I explain that problem to people, they would respond, well, then what term do you suggest we use instead? Very logical response to that one problem. But there's another problem, which is it lumps together things that are different and have to be considered separately. Intellectual property lumps together copyright law and patent law, and those two are completely different. They have nothing in common. And then trademark law, which is completely different from the other two and has nothing in common with them. And various others, many of which I can't quite remember because they're more obscure. And they're generally completely different from each other. The public policy issues raised by copyright law are completely different from the public policy issues raised by patent law. So if you lump the two together, you're looking at things in such a broad way you can't even see the issues, let alone think clearly about them. It's like trying to have a fluids policy. Imagine if people tried to discuss what fluids policy your country should have. And fluids include air, water, oil, alcohol. One policy for all these different things, that would be ridiculous. But they're all fluids. The point is that it would be silly to use that terminology. It would encourage people to try to look for broad generalizations that are simplistic and invariably stupid, instead of considering the separate issues separately, which makes it much easier to think about them clearly. In the same way, if we want to think about copyright issues and patent issues in an intelligent way, the first step is to separate them, to realize that copyrights and patents are completely different, they have almost nothing to do with each other, and that the issues they raise are different, and that to understand them, you just have to realize they're two different topics. So learn about copyright law and copyright issues. And then some other time, learn and think about patent law and patent issues. And don't assume they have anything to do with each other, because whatever you learn about copyright law, you can assume it's not true about patent law. Then you'll be right. That won't tell you what is true about patent law, but at least you'll be right. Whereas if you suppose that something that's true for copyright might apply to patents, you're surely going to be wrong. So you should never do that. You know, I wish I could cause you to forget that anybody ever made the slightest connection between them in your minds, but I can't do that. But at least I can urge you to work against going down that garden path that you've been led down. So we shouldn't replace the term intellectual property with any other. We should avoid making a generalization about things that are totally different from each other. So, to help you start distinguishing these two areas, I'm going to tell you some of the basic differences between copyright and patents. First of all, they apply to different kinds of things. A copyright applies to a work of authorship, whereas a patent applies to an idea or to a collection of ideas. A copyright covers details. It covers the details of expression of the work of authorship, not the ideas. Ideas are excluded from copyright law. If you read an algebra textbook, you're entitled to go write another algebra textbook which describes the same algebra, because copyright doesn't cover the ideas in that book. It only covers the details of expression. By contrast, a patent is a monopoly on the use of an idea, or maybe on several different ideas at once. Separately, that is. One patent could monopolize 5 or 20 or 50 different ideas, each one of them. But it's always a monopoly on an idea or ideas. Another difference is copyrights happen automatically. If you write something, it's copyrighted. Patents are issued by a government agency called the Patent Office in response to an application procedure. Now, this application procedure will surely cost you thousands of pounds. I don't know if anyone knows what it actually costs in the UK, you could tell us. And that's just the official fee. Paying people to draw up the application for you is typically going to cost 10 times as much or more. And then the Patent Office considers it. Now, in the US, the criterion is the idea has to be new, useful, and unobvious. I think it's stated in a different way in at least some European countries, but it comes to pretty much the same thing. The problem is, that might seem intelligent, that criterion, but patent offices all around the world have a very low standard for what unobvious means to them. They tend to mean unobvious to somebody with an IQ of 80. A couple of years ago in Australia, somebody got a patent on the wheel. And then a couple of years ago in the US, a child got a patent on using a swing to swing sideways, actually on a method of doing so. The child's father was a patent lawyer and wanted to teach the child about how the patent system works, but didn't expect that a patent would really be issued on this fairly old and well-known and not very unobvious idea. But it was, because I guess it would have been unobvious to somebody with an IQ of 80. They don't admit this, of course. They claim that whatever they issue a patent on is an invention that was of great value to the world, that should be greatly prized, and that we should make terrible sacrifices to encourage. Another difference is in the length of time they last. A copyright lasts, a copyright can last 150 years in some cases. It's a very long time. And they keep making it longer. Whereas patents last 20 years. Much shorter, but still a very long time when you look at a field like computing. 20 years ago, the IBM PC was fairly new, and the World Wide Web did not exist. And the Internet did not exist. There was its precursor, the ARPANET, but the Internet had not yet been switched on. So, if you're limited in developing software to ideas from 20 years ago, that's a crushing limitation. And finally, copyright covers copying. if you go into a cave and you can prove that you have no contact with the outside world for the next 2 years, and you write a novel in there, and then you come out and it turns out that a month before somebody else published a novel that's identical word for word to the one you wrote in the cave, you're not guilty of copyright infringement, and you can prove it, because you didn't copy it, and you can prove you didn't copy it. You didn't even see it. And if you can prove you didn't see the other work, that proves you didn't copy it. But with patent law, that doesn't matter. Even if you can prove that you had the idea yourself, independently, that does not mean you're entitled to use it. Because a patent is an absolute monopoly on the use of a specific idea or on several specific ideas. Once it's patented, you just can't use it. Now, copyrights and patents affect the field of software development in totally different ways. The reason is if you write a program, the copyright holder is you. But in order to write a program, you have to combine many ideas. And some of them are ideas other people have already thought of. So it's very likely that some of these ideas are patented by other people. And so applying patents to software ideas creates the danger that you can write a program yourself and get sued for writing it, for publishing it, even for running it. Most descriptions of the patent system, actually, I should now proceed to describe how the patent system works, more or less. Most descriptions of the patent system show it from the point of view of somebody who is applying for or has a patent. In effect, they ask you to imagine how it would feel to walk down the street with a patent in your pocket and know that from time to time you can pull it out and point it at somebody and say, "Give me your money." This is not an accident. Most descriptions of the patent system come from people who have a vested interest in that system. They may be officials of the patent office. They may be patent lawyers who get work when people apply for patents and when people sue for patent infringement. If you point this out, that they have a personal interest in that leads them to be biased, they'll respond, as lawyers typically do, by evading the issue in a subtle way. They'll say, "But I'm not prejudiced in favor of patent holders. I work for defendants too." And that may be true, but it's not the same thing. They're like mercenaries who will work for any side, but they want to have a lot of war going on. And likewise, patent lawyers may work for patent holders sometimes and for defendants sometimes, but as long as there are a lot of patents, they get a lot of work. So they have a vested interest in extending the patent system. You also get a lot of propaganda from patent holders. And so they've realized the best way to do this is to get you to identify with the patent holders and not with their victims. So I'm going to try to partly make up for that imbalance by describing what the patent system looks like to its victims, to those who want to develop software and use it or distribute it and not get sued. Imagine what it's like to walk down the street worrying if at any moment somebody will pull out a patent and say, "Give me your money." So I'm going to describe how the patent system works from the viewpoint of a software developer in a country that has software patents. So let's suppose you want to develop a program, and it's not a trivial program, so it combines many different ideas. How do you cope with the patent system? The first step is to try to enumerate the ideas that are used in your program. Now this is difficult, because there are many different ways to see things. So there could be something that's somebody else could see as an idea used in your program, but you will be seeing it you'll be chopping up the ideas in different ways, so you won't see that one. You'll see the same things as part of different ideas. There's more than one way to envision the same system as different ideas. But anyway, you do the best you can, and then you have to find out what patents there are that restrict the use of those ideas, or that restrict what you're doing, that might cover the thing you're planning to do in the program. This is impossible, and the reason is that patent applications being considered now are kept secret. Depending on the country, they may be published after 18 months. But that's still quite a while, during which the patent can be heading down the road at you, and there's no way you can find out. So you can't find out what all the patents are that may restrict the program you're about to write. Now, this is not just a theoretical concern. In 1984, the Compress program was published. It was a free software package for data compression. And it used an algorithm known as LZW, which at the time was not patented in the US. But then in 1985, a patent was issued. And a few years later, after a lot of people started using that program, the patent holders started threatening them all. So that was an example of this problem. We, in the GNU project, we wanted the GNU system to have data compression. So we started looking around saying, who can find us another data compression algorithm we could use? And somebody got in touch with us who said he'd developed an even better data compression algorithm, and he'd written a program, and he wanted to contribute it to us. About a week before we were going to release it, just by luck, I saw the New York Times on the day of the weekly patents column. And this is something that might have happened twice a year. And it said that somebody had been awarded a patent for a new method of data compression. So I thought, we better see what that says. And sure enough, it covered the program we were about to release. So that program died before it was born. Later on, we found another data compression algorithm, which was apparently never got covered by a patent, and that's what's used in gzip. So this is a real problem. But in any case, you can find out about the issued patents, because those are all published by the patent office. So you can look at them. You can't look at them all because there are too many. In the US, there are hundreds of thousands of software patents. And unless you make it a full-time job, you can't keep track of them. But you can, so what you have to do is search for ones that might be relevant. And when you do that, you'll find a lot of patents that might be relevant, but you won't necessarily find them all. It's not totally reliable. For instance, there was a patent in the US covering the technique known as natural order recalculation in spreadsheets. What this means is that when it's time to recalculate, it recalculates each cell after the cells it depends on, so that one pass of recalculating in the proper order makes everything consistent. The earliest spreadsheets recalculated top-down always, which meant that if cells depended on cells lower down, you might have to type recalculate several times to get the data to propagate all the way. So it was a pretty obvious feature to do this in the right order, using an algorithm which people generally call topological sorting. The first reference in the literature I could find describing the topological sorting algorithm was in 1963. Nonetheless, a patent was issued in 1982, I believe, that had been pending since 1971 or so. Anyway, and by the way, this is not unusual in the US for a patent to be pending for a long time. And sometimes there's a suspicion that the patent applicant keeps it pending for a long time because he wants time for society to make a big investment in the idea before they all discover that they're going to have to pay him to use it. These are known as submarine patents because they remain hidden and then they surface and torpedo your project. So this patent actually enumerated dozens of different ways to implement the topological sort algorithm. Every different variation he could think of for how to implement this was listed in there. But once when I sent somebody a copy of this patent, he said, I think you sent me the wrong one. You sent me a patent about compiling formulas into object code. So I pulled up my copy of that patent, and yeah, it said that it was a method for compiling formulas into object code, but it was the right patent. It didn't mention the word spreadsheet. It didn't mention the phrase natural order recalculation. It didn't mention the term topological sort. So you can't expect search methods to find you all the patents that are relevant to what you're doing. But you'll find a stack of a lot of patents. So the next question, the next step is to try to figure out what it is they prohibit you from doing. That's not easy because patents are written in tortuous legal language that is very hard to understand. The Australian government did a study of the patent system in the 1980s, or commissioned one from a university. And the study said that patents, as far as they could tell, provided no benefit to society, and that if not for international pressure, they would recommend abolishing the patent system. But due to the international pressure, they recommended merely to make patents narrower in scope and harder to get and last for a shorter period of time. And one thing they mentioned was that nobody read patents to try to learn about a field because they're too hard to read. Now, this is supposedly one of the benefits that the patent system provides, is that it encourages the publication of ideas that people can then read to learn to get other ideas. But patents are too hard to read, and everyone who's ever tried knows this, so they don't. You never read a patent except to find out the bad news. So they quoted an inventor as saying, I can't recognize my own inventions in patentees. And I've discovered from experience that this is true. In the 1980s, Paul Heckel, a software developer, developed a somewhat interesting application for displaying data on the screen, and he got a couple of patents from ideas based on that program. I spent an hour or so once looking at one of those patents, trying to think of a clear, simple way to describe what it covers, and I couldn't find one. I couldn't find any clearer way than to just repeat claim one of the patent, which is not very easy to understand. And apparently he couldn't quite tell either, because when he saw HyperCard, he realized it wasn't much like his program, so he figured his patents would not apply to HyperCard. But then his lawyer said that the way the patent was actually written, you could argue it applied to HyperCard, so he sued or threatened Apple. I don't remember which. And Apple didn't seem to be terribly worried about this, so he started threatening Apple's customers. And I think he squeezed some money out of Apple, though I'm not certain I don't know how much. Once, when I was giving this speech, he was in the audience. And at this point, he jumped up and said, "That's not true. I just didn't know the scope of my protection." And I said, "Yes, that's what I said." So if you want to find out what these patents prohibit you from doing, you're going to have to spend a lot of time and money to discuss them and your plans with a lawyer. And the lawyer is then going to say things like, if you do something in this area, you're almost certain to lose the lawsuit. If you do something in this area, you've got a substantial chance of losing the lawsuit. And if you really want to be safe, you better stay out of this area. And remember that there's a sizable element of chance in the outcome of any lawsuit. So now that you have a regular, predictable terrain for doing business, what are you going to do? For each patent, you have 3 options for how to try to cope with it, each of which may or may not be available, may or may not be workable in a given situation. The 3 options are, first, avoid the patent; second, get a license for the patent; and third, overturn the patent in court. So I'll discuss these 3 options one by one. The first option is to avoid the patent, which means stay out of this area, or as close to the edge as you feel you dare stray. And whether that's easy or hard or impossible depends on what idea is patented. Sometimes a feature is patented, and then you avoid the patent by not implementing that feature. Well, some features are more important than others. If it's some obscure feature that only a few users will care about, fine, you just say, I won't do it. But sometimes there's certain users that are important who do value that feature. In the late 80s, the users of the word processor Xywrite received a downgrade in the mail. A copy of Xywrite from which a feature had been removed. It turns out this feature was that you could define a certain sequence of characters as an abbreviation. And then when you type it followed by punctuation, it would automatically replace itself with the expansion that you set up. It turns out that around 1984, somebody got a patent on this, and he then threatened the developers of Xywrite. At first, they thought about trying to get a license, but they said that the patent holder kept changing his demands. You couldn't negotiate with him. They also thought about trying to challenge the validity in court, and that's why they contacted me, because the Emacs text editor that I developed in the 70s had such a feature since around 1977 or so. This means I've had at least one patented idea in my life. At least one patentable idea in my life, and I know it because somebody else patented it afterwards. But I guess they decided that it wasn't worth the money to do that, so they took the feature out instead. Well, I guess if you take out one feature, people might still think your word processor is worth using. But then if you take out 5 more features, and then 5 more, at some point your word processor is going to be an inferior word processor. Sometimes what's patented is a method, an internal method. In that case, the question is there another one you could use? There was, maybe still is, a patent on a faster version of the FFT. Runs about twice as fast. Now, if your program just does an FFT fairly small once in a while, you could use the ordinary FFT algorithm. It'll be fast enough. The user won't even notice. But if your program is compute-bound and doing Fourier transforms all the time, and it runs fast enough with the faster version, then if you try to use the ordinary FFT, your program just won't do its job. Well, of course, computers get faster, so that problem would tend to solve itself. But you see what I mean. If there's no other algorithm that'll do the job, you're stuck. Now, if you want to do data compression, and you can't use LZW, you can find another data compression algorithm. We had to work very hard to find one we could use. It was not hard to find another reasonable data compression algorithm, but there were lots of patents We had to work hard to find an algorithm that was not patented by anybody. And it turned out to do somewhat better compression, too. So it was actually a superior program that we released, the gzip program. And anybody who wanted to do data compression certainly switched to gzip. But there were people who were using the LZW algorithm not because they had the goal of data compression, but because they wanted to make a GIF image that somebody else could display with his GIF displayer. And the GIF format specifies LZW compression. It's no good having a better algorithm for data compression because that produces different output and it's not compatible with GIF format. So for that purpose, no other algorithm will do. Likewise, if you want to implement the PostScript specification, nothing but LZW will do it because that's what they specified. So you're in trouble. And there is no alternative. Sometimes what's patented is a method so broad that it locks up an entire field. For instance, the field of public key encryption was entirely covered by a very broad patent that expired in 1997. And until then, most people were excluded from public key encryption. So avoiding the patent is sometimes feasible, sometimes painful, sometimes impossible. And in over 10 years, we have not succeeded in convincing the Internet to switch over from GIF format to our superior replacement. People designed another image format that used the gzip algorithm for compression instead of the LZW algorithm, and it did better compression too. The problem was that society had invested too much in GIF format. It was a de facto standard. And the users mostly didn't think it was urgent to switch. And the software developers said, all the users are still using GIFs. We have to support them. And they didn't see any short-term benefit in trying to move to ping, so they didn't. Now, when a standard is covered by just one patent, you're lucky. If you look at the MPEG-2 video compression format, there's a long list of patents covering that. In particular, there are 39 different U.S. patents covering the MPEG-2 standard. The negotiations to arrange for some way to get a license for all those patents took longer than the development of the standard itself. And in fact, people on the JPEG committee are saying that they've almost had to give up, or maybe that they did give up, on trying to develop a new version of the JPEG standard because there were too many patents. And this representative of the committee was saying that prescriptive standardization had become almost impossible because of software patents. And there are big fights inside various standards organizations about whether they will issue standards that are restricted in their use by patents. And what good is a standard if people are not free to implement it? So that's the option of avoiding the patent. The next option is that of getting a license to use the patented idea. This may be impossible because the patent holder is not required to offer you a license. The patent holder can just say, I don't want any competitors, you can't do this. Drop dead. Well, that's exaggerating a bit. You don't die because your project fails. At least not usually. Usually it's sad but not fatal. You do something else instead. But in any case, they can say that your business has to shut down, that the product you were developing can't be released. you may be able to get a license. In fact, most patent holders will offer you a license if you offer enough money. The owner of the natural order recalculation patent was asking for 5% of the gross sales of every spreadsheet sold in the U.S. Now, you might be able to afford 5% for one patent, but then you run into another patent and another and another and another. What if you have to get 20 licenses for 20 different patents and pay 5% for each one? What if you have to get 21 such licenses? Now you have to pay out of pocket for every copy that you sell. Well, these are sort of funny mathematical extremes. People in business told me that, practically speaking, 2 or 3 such patent licenses would make your business fail. You don't need 20. There are, however, those for which getting licenses for patents is very easy and convenient, and they rely on doing that all the time. Those are the global megacorporations, because they tend to have a lot of patents, and so they make others cross-license with them, and they cross-license with each other. So they avoid the problem. They don't usually have to pay. They get licenses without paying. IBM published an article in 1990 in Think magazine, issue number 5, about what IBM does with its patent portfolio. And this article said that IBM got 2 kinds of benefit from its 9,000 active U.S. patents. One benefit was collecting royalties, but the other benefit was getting access to the patents of others. That is, being able to use ideas even though others have patented them. They do this by cross-licensing. And the article said that the second benefit was perhaps an order of magnitude bigger than the first. 10 times as big, in other words. Now, what happens with patents varies tremendously. In fact, The Economist once compared the patent system to a time-consuming lottery, which, of course, has a few winners and a lot of losers. Most patents bring no income to those who own the patent. But IBM being so big, it's a way of measuring the average. So when IBM tells you that the benefit of avoiding the trouble from all the patents belonging to others that it might have infringed is worth 10 times the direct benefit it gets from its patents, well, the benefit of avoiding trouble is a measure of the size of the trouble. What IBM is really telling us is that, on the average, the patent system is going to cause you 10 times as much trouble as benefit, unless you can avoid the trouble. Now, IBM does practice cross-licensing and avoids this trouble. It's a trouble they would have had, but they don't. So IBM basically sees only the benefits. For IBM, software patents are beneficial, and that's why IBM advocates software patents all around the world, because IBM knows that it's not going to have to deal with the bad part, only the good part. However, you and I are not going to have, even if we tried our best to get software patents, we're not going to get thousands of them or even dozens of them. So we can't make everybody cross-license. You see, a patent is like a weapon pointing in one direction only. If I have 3 patents, one points there, one points there, and one points there, and somebody over there points a patent at me and says, surprise, my patents are not going to do me any good. I can't make him cross-license because he is not where my patents point. So I'm just in trouble. IBM has so many patents that it has a patent pointing anywhere. Wherever somebody pops up and points a patent at IBM, IBM has patents pointing there. Except in one case, one kind of case. Some of the companies that go around threatening people with patents do only that. Their only business is threatening people with lawsuits. They don't produce anything except lawsuits. They are patent parasites. And this is a common fate for any patent that belongs to a startup company, because as you probably know, most startup companies fail. And when that happens, the patents just get sold off to whoever wants to buy them, typically a parasite. So lawyers realize how annoying it would be if they had to deal with patents on their work. So they have made sure this doesn't happen. There are no patents for methods of litigation, for instance. So the result is that even IBM can't make these parasites cross-license. So IBM may just have to pay them sometimes. But they figure that's just part of the cost of doing business, and they still have a big advantage over the smaller companies that can't make the other real developers cross-license with them. So they figure it's still overall beneficial for them that there are software patents and that all the rest of us have so much trouble with them. Now, this fact of cross-licensing is important for seeing the fallacy in a common myth that people have about the patent system. People think that patents, quote, protect, unquote, the, quote, small inventor, unquote. They have a mythical idea of how the patent system works, and they apply it to a mythical scenario. It's the scenario of the starving genius. Let me recite it for you. Imagine that there is a brilliant designer of whatever it is who's been working for years in his attic developing a better design for whatever it is, and now he wants to actually produce these things, so he's going to start a company, and then the big companies are going to jump in immediately and compete with him, and they'll take all the business away from him, and his company will go broke, and he'll starve. This is the scenario they propose to us. It's an absurd scenario. First of all, in high-tech fields, the ideas mostly don't come from people in isolation. They come from people working in the field, developing things that are, developing products that are going to get used. In the course of doing that, you'll have ideas. Another thing is that, assuming that this guy starts a small business, small businesses don't inevitably fail just because a big company might compete with them. Big companies have advantages of certain kinds, and small companies have advantages of other kinds. If this person has an idea, has a head for business, he'll go in a direction where small companies' advantages will help. So he won't necessarily fail, even if the big companies can compete with him. But supposing he does fail, and after all, he probably will fail anyway, because most new companies fail within a few years. 95%, I believe, of new businesses fail within a few years. So, whatever is the case, he's probably going to fail. But at that point, that doesn't mean he would starve, because if he's so brilliant in this high-tech field, he can probably get a job. So the scenario makes no sense, but let's carry it a little further, because the next thing they say is the patent system will come to his rescue, because he can get a patent on his brilliant idea, and then when IBM wants to compete with him, he can say, "You can't compete with me, IBM. I've got a patent. Now you're stopped." Well, if he tries to say this, IBM will say, "Oh, you have a patent. How nice. Well, we have this patent and this one and this one and this one and this one that cover various parts of your product. So sign a cross-license with us." And if you think that you could overturn these 5 patents, we'll find some more. And of course, patent legislation is very expensive. It's even very expensive for the plaintiffs, unless their goal is just to squeeze some money out of somebody. So probably he does sign a cross-license. And then he's safe from IBM's patents, and he can go back to producing his product. But so can IBM. That's the whole point of cross-licensing. It's how IBM gets access to the patents of others, including to the patent of the starving genius small inventor. So the patent system did not, quote, protect, unquote, the small inventor after all. It doesn't do what this myth says it does. It doesn't solve the problem that people think it solves. So there are also, but in addition to the mega corporations as those for whom getting a patent license is often very easy, there are those of us for whom it's next to impossible, us free software developers. Now, everything I've said so far applies just as much to non-free software as to free software. The problems and the possible solutions I've been telling you about apply to all software. But here's one point at which free software is especially badly hurt. We've been successful at developing a broad spectrum of free software because we've shown that we can develop software without money. We don't need capital to invest. We don't need to do it as a business. Powerful free software packages are developed by volunteers. So we can develop software without money. But we can't buy patent licenses without money. In fact, the usual terms for a patent license require paying a certain amount per copy. Well, we can't do that because we can't count the copies. We don't know how many there are. If somebody offered me a patent license where I'd have to pay 1/1,000,000th of a dollar per copy, the total amount of money might be something I have in my pocket. But since I can't count the copies, I can't operate under that license. Now, it is also possible to have a license for a lump sum payment, but those lump sum payments are typically many thousands of dollars. Often there's a lump sum payment and a price per copy. So software patents tend to exclude and abolish free software. So that's the option of getting a license for the patent. The third option is the option of overturning the patent in court, which means essentially you say, okay, sue me, and then you go to court and try to defend yourself. Whether there is any possibility of doing this depends on a lot of details of history. In effect, people rolled various dice years ago, and the way those dice came out determines whether you've got a chance. So the first thing you do is investigate and find out how the dice came out. And you may find that you've got nothing to go on, or you may find that you've got somewhat of a case to go on. But then the problem is, assuming you've got a case to go on, that it's very expensive to actually do it. In the U.S., it costs millions of dollars to be on either side of a patent suit. And, for instance, there was a patent suit in which the defendant was Qualcomm, and Qualcomm lost, and had to pay $13 million, of which I think $8 million went to the lawyers on both sides. And the other $5 million went to the patent holder. So, if you're a big wealthy company, then you'll do this when it seems like you've got a chance to win. You'll make the calculation and you may fight. But if you're not so wealthy, being attacked even with an absurd, probably invalid patent is a very dangerous thing. Of course, when you listen to the proponents of software patents, they'll say, oh, you shouldn't worry so much about the invalid patents. I understand the patent office is incompetent and issues lots of invalid patents, but the courts will clear those out of the way. So they're making a disaster sound like it's just procedure. So those are the three options. And the point to realize is that whether each option is applicable in any given case depends on different things. Certain things determine whether it works to avoid the patent. Other independent facts determine whether it's feasible to get a license for the patent, and other independent facts determine whether it's feasible to try to overturn the patent. So you could be unlucky in all three, and none of them is feasible, and then your project is just dead. And you don't know how many times this is going to happen, because you see, it's so unfeasible to study the patents that nobody really does it. So what people really do is they just go ahead developing software, hoping that they'll get through safely. It's like knowing that you have to cross the minefield, so you close your eyes and walk. A minefield is a good analogy because a modern program typically involves many ideas combined, which means that there are many design decisions you make, each of which has a certain danger of getting you sued. That's like crossing a minefield. There are many steps to take, and at each step, chances are nothing's going to happen, but you might step on a mine that will blow up. Developing a program, there are many design decisions to make, hundreds, thousands, whatever, and at each design decision, chances are nothing bad's going to happen to you, but you might just step on a patent which will blow up and destroy your project. And this brings me to another important question. People used to ask me in these speeches a rather misleading and deceptive question. They would say, other fields deal with patents. Why should software be an exception? The assumption they're asking us to accept is that to escape from a problem is unfair. I could imagine them saying, other people get cancer, why should you not get it? Now, I see things differently. I'd say that each case of somebody who doesn't get cancer is a good thing, regardless of the fact that somebody else did get it. But there is an intelligent question hidden somewhere underneath that tricky one. And that is, you might ask, should patent policy be different in different fields, and if so, why? That's a question without prejudgment. It's an intelligent question. So I'll now try to respond to it. People have a mythical idea of how the patent system applies to production. People have the idea, a picture in their minds, that for each product there's one patent covering the whole product. Now, that may have been true for mechanical designs in the 19th century, or at least usually, but it's not true today. And in fact, it's common in all fields that there can be various parts of a product covered by different patents. But how much this is true varies very much from one field to another. At one extreme you have pharmaceuticals, where, at least until recently, the normal thing was that a patent would cover an entire chemical formula. So if you developed a new drug, it wouldn't be patented already. So you would get the patent. And that's an interesting phrase. People will still talk about the patent for a product, where they're assuming that there's only one patent covering it. Every time you hear a person say that, he's in the grip of this mythical idea of how patents work. So at one extreme is pharmaceuticals, which is the closest area to this one product, one patent myth. At the other extreme is software, because software packages are more complicated in terms of how many different things they do and how many parts they've got than anything else designed by human beings. A physical system containing 1 million parts with nothing repeating is a mega project. You're talking about something, the scope of a space shuttle or a giant hydroelectric project, maybe. Probably not, because you see, that might have 1 million parts, but it's many repeating identical subunits. In a program, you don't have repeating identical subunits. You write a subroutine, and one of them is all you need. So when a few people in a few years write a program with a few 100,000 lines of code, that's probably 1 million different pieces, and there's no repetition. Why is it that software is so much more complicated than physical systems? The reason is that software design is inherently easier than all the physical fields of engineering. Because physical engineering has to cope with the perversity of matter. It doesn't do what it's told. It doesn't do what it's defined to do. It just does what it does. And often what it does varies based on luck. And you have to try it out many times before you get a complete picture of what might really happen to it. And there are all sorts of complicated issues that you have to worry about and try to cope with in your design that we in software can avoid, because we're doing mathematics. We're designing mathematical statements made up of ideal mathematical objects that have definitions and that do exactly what they're supposed to do. For instance, if I put an if statement inside a while statement, I don't have to worry that the while statement will oscillate at such a high frequency that this will induce currents in some other part of my program and cause errors there. I don't have to worry that the voltage drop through the while statement will cause the if statement not to function within spec anymore. I don't have to worry that the if statement will vibrate mechanically and that will eventually wear it away or cause it to lose its elasticity or something like that, and it will eventually break. I don't have to worry that it will rub against the while statement and eventually wear away the connection between them and it will break. I don't have to worry that corrosive substances from the surroundings will get in between the if statement and the while statement and eventually cause bad electrical contact between them. I don't have to worry that it will dissipate so much power that one of these statements will melt. I don't have to worry how I would get inside the while statement to replace the if statement if it did break. And another gigantic worry I don't have is how to assemble the parts. I don't have to design how I will construct each copy of the program, how to ensure that I can physically put the if statement inside the while statement. Because we don't have to design a factory to produce copies of each program. We can just type copy. There's a universal copy command that'll copy any program. If I want to mass produce CDs, I just write a master and send it to a factory that will mass produce copies of any CD whatsoever. So there are all these problems that I don't have in the software field that I would have in some other field. This makes software development far, far easier. But I would assume that the intelligence spectrum of people in the software field is the same as the intelligence spectrum of engineers in all those other fields. So if the field itself is inherently easier, what are we going to do? We're going to push our abilities to the limit. We're going to make bigger and bigger things, and eventually it'll get to be hard. Eventually it'll get to be as big as we can do. That's what has happened. You may have seen people talk about the software crisis, about how hard software development is. There's no real contradiction between what they say and what I've just said, because we're not really talking about the same question. I'm comparing the difficulty of developing a program versus some physical system with the same complexity in the number of different things going on in it. Whereas they are talking about software of the size that people regularly develop. Yes, you make the program big enough and it gets to be hard. Just as developing physical systems is hard. But the point that we reach, the point at which it gets to be hard, is a point where there are lots and lots of parts, lots of ideas used in one product. And this means that the number of points of vulnerability to being sued for patent infringement in one software product is much more than in typical physical engineering fields. In fact, I'd say much more than in any other field. If you look at your word processor, it probably has hundreds of features. Each of those features could be patented in at least one way. And that doesn't even count the various internal methods that might be patented. So there are many different things that are vulnerable inside this one software product to do one overall job. And that shows the danger we're in. So the best way to explain to people who don't know anything about programming what this danger is like is with an analogy. Imagine if in the 1700s the governments of Europe had decided they wanted to promote progress in symphonic music with a system of musical idea patents, so that any musical idea that could be described in words could have been patented. For instance, the use of a four-note motif could have been, a particular motif could have been patented, or the use of a certain short melody, or a chord progression could have been patented, or a certain form based on repetitions could be patented, or the use of certain instruments temporarily playing together could have been patented. Any idea that could have been described in words. Okay, now imagine that it's 1800 and you're Beethoven and you want to write a symphony and not get sued. You're going to find it's harder to write a symphony and not get sued than to write a symphony that sounds good. Because a symphony is big and complicated and has lots of notes. And these notes embody many musical ideas. And if any of the ideas that have been patented already can be identified in the notes of your symphony, you can get sued. Whether you were aware that that idea was there or not, you could still get sued. So, being the kind of person Beethoven was, you would have complained about this very loudly. And the patent holders would have said, "Oh, Beethoven, you're just jealous because we thought of those ideas before you. Why don't you go think of your own ideas?" Which is a misleading response. In fact, Beethoven had a lot of new musical ideas. Some of his music was considered shocking and controversial at the time, despite the fact that he was a very famous and highly regarded composer in his lifetime. some of his music was quite controversial because of its new ideas. But in order to make recognizable music, he had to combine those new ideas with lots of old ideas. And there he would have been infringing these musical idea patents, which fortunately in our real history didn't exist, so he didn't have a problem with them. You see, nobody is such a genius, not even Beethoven, that he could reinvent music from zero and make something that anyone wants to listen to. Pierre Boulez decided he would reinvent the language of music in a completely different way. And he did it, and hardly anyone listens. It's the same with software. Nobody is such a genius that he can reinvent all of software from zero in a completely different way and produce something that anybody wants to use. Even assuming you could make something that was workable, it would be too different, it would be too unrecognizable. You know, a word processor that had none of the usual concepts and features of any word processor anybody's ever seen would not be very popular as a word processor, even if it turned out to be workable. So the idea of go away and invent your own new ideas is a completely stupid response. The work of software development is a work of combining many ideas. When you write a modern program, even if you're including some new ideas that occurred to you, you have to combine them with hundreds of already known ideas in order to produce a useful and innovative even program that's going to contribute to the world of software. Software patents are an obstacle to this. And in fact, they're completely an impediment to the work of the software field. Because the main work of the software field is developing software, writing a large program and getting every little detail right so that all the features really work and are smooth and do what the user wants to do. Thinking of ideas, well, that happens all the time. If you're writing software, you're going to have some ideas. And so when you write your next program, you can put your ideas together with all the ideas that you learn from other people and make a program that's better. But if you are forced to start from zero and you can't use the well-known ideas, then what you produce won't amount to anything. And so the system of patents, which is intended to encourage people to have and publish more ideas, is completely inappropriate for a field like software. It's based on the assumption that the ideas are scarce and precious, and that the implementation of these ideas is secondary. But in software, the big job is implementation, and the ideas are plentiful. So a system like patent law is obviously wrong for the software field. And there is even economic research showing how in a field with incremental innovation, and software certainly fits that description, a patent system can retard progress. The defenders of software patents like to say, well, it's true it causes all these painful problems, but it surely promotes progress, and progress is the greatest good, so you'll just have to suffer with all those inconveniences. But that assumption is naive, and this research shows that it's wrong, that a patent system can retard progress. To follow the math for yourself, take a look at www.researchoninnovation, that's 3 words jammed together as one, .org/patents.pdf. There is also an empirical study on that site showing how when the U.S. started to allow software patents, this did not result in an increase in investment in software research. On the contrary, it resulted in a shift of investment from research to patent. So both theoretically and empirically, we see that software patents did not produce even that secondary benefit that supposedly they were going to result in. So why does anyone favor software patents? Some of them have been fooled by the term intellectual property into adopting a blanket ideological right-wing approach to these issues. They think property, creating new systems of property is always good, so everywhere we could imagine one, let's make one. And they can't even doubt that this has to be beneficial for humanity somehow. And if they can't see the benefit, well, they'll redefine benefits so that they can find one. Another reason, of course, is there are those who do benefit, the global megacorporations. They work very hard to lobby for software patents. And they have a pet government, the United States government, which does whatever the megacorporations want. Effectively, Bush is the corporation's poodle. So you're really lucky you are ruled by the poodle's poodle. So they send lobbyists around to politicians who don't know much about software and say software patents give the software companies more power to, quote, protect themselves, unquote. So that has to be good, right? And if you don't understand the effects software patents really have on software development, you might think that's true. You might not see through it. Another foolish argument they make is if the U.S. has software patents and Europe does not, then U.S. companies will have an advantage. But actually, that again comes from not knowing how the patent system works, because really it's just the opposite. Since the U.S. has software patents, that means we Americans are vulnerable. Anyone in the world from anywhere can go to the U.S., virtually go to the U.S., and apply for a U.S. software patent and then sue us in U.S. courts. We're vulnerable at home where we live. But if Europe does not have software patents, then European software developers are safe, at least at home. Nobody could then get a European software patent and attack them at home where they live. So you are always at an advantage if your country does not have software patents. Europeans, as long as the U.S. have software patents, Europeans can apply for U.S. patents and sue us poor Americans until our government realizes how stupid its policy is. So I'm hoping that if Europe rejects software patents, that eventually the U.S. will realize that its stupid policy needs to be changed. They also make a stupid argument that, even stupider, but the U.S. is number one in adopting information technology, and the U.S. has software patents. That proves software patents must be good, right? Well, the U.S. was number one in adopting information technology even before it had software patents. So I don't think software patents could have possibly had anything to do with bringing this about. I was in the field back then when there were no software patents in the U.S. There was no increase in progress due to software patents. There may have been an increase in progress just because computers got cheaper and a lot more people could use them, and all of a sudden there was a lot more demand for software, a lot more activities that could afford to use a computer. That's all. Right now, the European Union is considering whether to have software patents. The treaty that set up the European Patent Office says that software is not patentable. But the European Patent Office decided they wanted to increase the size of their operation by issuing software patents. So a few years ago, they went to the governments of Europe and said, please, we suggest that you amend the treaty to change this. And they voted no. And then the Patent Office came back to them and said, please vote on this again. And they voted no. And then the patent office started issuing software patents anyway, defying the treaty. There has not been much enforcement of these software patents in Europe because their validity is questionable. A court could look at the treaty and say, this patent was never supposed to be issued at all. So now they're trying to get a directive passed that would authorize software patents. But instead of coming right out and saying so, they wrote a directive about, quote, computer-implemented inventions, unquote. And that covers a broader territory. Because, for instance, you could imagine a patent covering a process to be carried out in a factory, and there are computers involved in calculating exactly what to do. But the process overall is, mixing and combining and changing chemicals, say. So that's an ordinary physical process. It's just being carried out with the help of computers. It would make sense that that's patentable. After all, physical processes have been. And this isn't, patenting a physical process that you carry out with the help of computers, or the actual factory equipment which does things to the chemicals with the help of computers is, the consequences are not very different from patenting another device that did the same job without computers, or the same kind of job. So that's not controversial. Nobody is fighting against the patentability of factory processes that are carried out with computers. But the same directive would also have authorized software patents. The words were designed to be stretched so that they could say this is a directive that's safe. It's only for those factory processes implemented by computer, but we could see how the patent office and the courts could interpret it differently and get the wrong result. So we started saying to the European Parliament, please amend this. They say it's not supposed to allow software patents. All right, here are the amendments necessary so that it really won't allow software patents. Please pass them. The free software movement, the free software community, I should say, took the lead in grassroots activism in the European Parliament. But it was joined by proprietary software developers because they realized they were in the same danger. And it was joined by economists. It was joined by various other political movements that saw some relationship with their cause. And we won. A month ago, the European Parliament amended the directive, not just once, but in many different points, closing all the loopholes that would have allowed software patents. We were amazed. A day before the vote, we thought we would lose. But we won that battle. This doesn't mean that we're safe in Europe now, because the war's not over. We won just one battle. Because now it goes to the Council of Ministers. On November 10th, they're going to raise the issue of software patents. And by the way, a delay in that would be a very good thing. Time seems to be on our side for the most part. It gives us more time to convince people, to show them what's really at stake here. But we don't know if we can count on getting any more time, so you've got to go to work fast. You've got to convince people in the UK government that they should oppose software patents. Now, this is going to be hard because Blair is not just Bush's poodle, he's Mr. Bill's poodle too. But you've got to try. And there are handouts here from the organization FFII, which is the best expert on the issue of software patents in Europe. Our main leader in the fight against software patents is Hartmut Pilsch of FFII. So you have their handouts here, right?
They've been handed around.
Oh, good. So those are good talking points. The symphony the musical idea patent analogy is a very good analogy to use. People who've never written a program in their lives understand this analogy because they've at least listened to symphonies. And they know how many different musical ideas would be embodied in one symphony. Now, you don't just take the ideas and drop them in. You have to implement them by writing notes. And the implementation of the same idea in two different symphonies will look different because it has to fit in with the rest of the symphony. But nonetheless, you are combining the ideas. And any restriction on using ideas makes it hard to make the larger works that combine them. Please, I urge you, don't write letters to politicians, but don't stop at writing to them. You have to go see them. They need to see a lot of people coming to talk to them. Like 40 people wanting to talk to them in the same week. That's going to make them think. So spread the word. Now, software patents are dangerous for any organization that uses computers if it has any amount of money that somebody might want to take away from them. Most businesses are not in the computer field, but most businesses use computers, and they are vulnerable too. If the CIOs of various companies knew how dangerous software patents could be, they would be lobbying against this. And some of them are, but not enough. So if you have contacts with the executives of a corporation, talk to them. Don't talk to the lawyers. Remind the executives, well, the lawyers work for you, and this is not a legal issue. This is a political issue about a policy that could hurt your company, and you need to understand this. Your lawyer has interests of his own, and he's not going to see this in the broad picture. Your lawyer would be a good person to advise you on how to deal with a particular patent threat when you encounter one. But this is an issue you need to think about for yourself. So, we've shown that our community can mobilize and win battles. That should be reason for hope. It means that we can be strong enough we might win the next battle too. And if we save Europe from software patents, we may save the whole world eventually. Some places may remain in the Dark Ages for a while, but eventually we'll be saved. It's now up to you.